John started his day bright and early, warming up the old coffee maker that stubbornly kept working at full speed. His workshop was an extension of himself, modest but organized. The smell of oil, combined with the sound of tools, was as familiar to him as the creak of his front door. He spent long hours fine-tuning engines, diagnosing problems, and offering honest service to the customers who came by. There was no glamour in his routine, but there was purpose, even if exhaustion sometimes stole the sparkle from his eyes. John's home was in the neighboring town and mirrored the simplicity of his life. A small house with peeling paint and a garden he tried to keep in order on weekends, whenever work allowed. His days were always the same, and he rarely ventured beyond the route between the workshop and home. Occasionally, he would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the street and losing himself in his thoughts. He never complained. Gratitude for the little things was what kept his spirit resilient. Most of the workshop's clients were familiar faces. "John, think you can fix the old car again?" they'd often ask, usually with a smile and a note of appreciation. He enjoyed helping, even when payments were tight or delayed. "Don't worry, I'll do my best," he'd reply, wiping his grease-covered hands. It was a silent partnership where he offered trust and earned respect. Even though money was tight at home, John never went without. Despite the hardships, John had something rare: he believed in the goodness of people. During his brief moments of rest, he dreamed of transformations, not just for himself, but for the community around him. He imagined what life would be like if it weren't limited by tight schedules and the constant worry of paying bills. But, as always, he sighed and returned to work, tucking those dreams away in the back of his mind. At the end of each day, when he locked up the workshop and drove home, he felt the weight of his routine on his shoulders. It was as if every bolt tightened and every engine repaired represented a part of his own life being adjusted. Yet, somewhere deep inside, there was a spark that told him something big could still happen, he just didn't know how or when. The wind howled along the road as John drove his old pickup truck. The wipers struggled to push aside the heavy rain that made visibility nearly impossible. It was one of those days when the routine felt even heavier. The dark road twisted toward his home when, in the distance, he noticed something unusual: a car stopped on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. As he got closer, he saw a woman clutching her coat tightly around herself, completely soaked, looking around as if hoping for a miracle. Without a second thought, John pulled over. "Need some help?" he asked, stepping out of the truck and immediately being drenched by the downpour. The woman, her hair plastered to her face, nodded quickly. "My car died, and I don't know what to do. I tried calling for help, but no one's answering." John, with his calm demeanor, popped the hood and took a look. "It's just the battery," he said, almost relieved. Grabbing the jumper cables from his truck, he had her engine roaring back to life in minutes. The woman looked at him in disbelief, as though John's simple act was beyond comprehension. When everything was sorted, the woman insisted, "Please, let me pay you for your time and help." John, his hands still greasy and a genuine smile on his face, shook his head. "No need for that. Just do the same for someone else when you get the chance. Pay it forward." She stared at him, surprised, and then a glimmer of gratitude lit up her eyes. "I'll remember that. I promise." As the woman drove away, John climbed back into his truck, soaked to the bone but with a lighter heart. He never expected anything in return, he never did. But something about that brief interaction stuck with him. Maybe it was the look on her face, or maybe it was the thought that small gestures could have a big impact. Driving back home, the sound of the rain felt less oppressive. John had done what he thought was right, and that was enough. Little did he know, that simple moment would become the catalyst for the greatest transformation of his life. It was a typical morning at John's workshop, and he was already immersed in his work, fine-tuning the engine of an old car. The noise of engines and the smell of oil filled the air as usual, but a distinct sound caught his attention, the purr of an engine he didn't recognize. Lifting his head, John saw a gleaming luxury car pulling up slowly in front of the shop. It was the kind of vehicle he only saw on TV or in magazines, completely out of place in the modest neighborhood. Wiping his hands on a worn rag, John walked to the door, intrigued. From the car stepped a uniformed chauffeur, who opened the back door to reveal a woman elegantly dressed. It took John a moment to recognize her. She was the woman from that rainy night. She walked toward him with a warm smile that seemed to brighten the room as much as the car had. "John, you must remember me," she began, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah, the woman you helped during that storm. I had to come by personally to thank you." John was momentarily speechless, surprised by the unexpected encounter. Of course, I remember," he replied, offering a shy smile as he rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when nervous. Sarah didn't waste any time. "I'd like to invite you to dinner at my home tonight. It's the least I can do for someone so kind." John hesitated, unaccustomed to such gestures. "Oh, that's not necessary, really, I just did what anyone would have done." But Sarah insisted, her tone both firm and gentle. "Please, it would be an honor. There's also something else I'd like to discuss with you." Back at the workshop, John couldn't stop thinking about the invitation as he watched the luxury car drive away. The memory of that rainy night came flooding back. He never expected anything in return, let alone such an extraordinary invitation. Yet, something in Sarah's voice made it clear that this dinner wasn't just about gratitude. Intrigued, he decided he would go. As evening fell, John put on his best shirt, simple, but the most presentable one he owned. He had no idea what awaited him, but the invitation felt like the opening of a door to something much bigger than he could have imagined. As John arrived at the property, he was struck by the grandeur before him. The mansion was majestic, with an imposing entrance surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. Golden lights reflected off the wide windows, and a uniformed doorman opened the door to greet him. "Mr. John, welcome," the man said with a polished smile, guiding him toward the main entrance. The marble floors gleamed, and the walls were adorned with artwork that seemed to tell stories from another era. It was a world John had never imagined stepping into. Sarah appeared at the top of the staircase, wearing an elegant dress but carrying a smile that radiated an unexpected simplicity. "John, I'm so glad you came," she said, descending the stairs with genuine enthusiasm. Still slightly disoriented, he replied, "I almost didn't. This is all surreal." She laughed softly. "I can understand how it must feel. But please, come with me. Tonight is about gratitude." She led him into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the gardens, glowing softly under the night sky. During dinner, Sarah shared a bit of her story. She was the owner of a successful company, with connections that stretched far beyond anything John could imagine. But on that rainy night, she wasn't the influential woman everyone knew. "I was coming back from a difficult meeting, and that car breakdown felt like the final straw on a day that couldn't get any worse," she admitted. "And then you showed up. You didn't hesitate to help, even though I was a stranger." John, uncomfortable with the praise, simply shook his head. "It was nothing. I just did what felt right." Sarah interrupted, her gaze steady but full of warmth. "It was far more than that. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, genuine kindness. In a world that often feels dominated by self-interest, you acted without expecting anything in return." As she spoke, John began to realize that this dinner wasn't just about saying thank you. There was something deeper in her words, something that felt like the beginning of a larger story he couldn't quite grasp. Before he could ask, Sarah looked at him with a glimmer in her eye and said, "John, you have no idea how that simple act changed something in me. And now, I want to repay it in a way that truly makes a difference." Sarah rested her chin on her hand, observing John with a curiosity that felt almost childlike. Dinner had been served, but it was clear the real conversation was just beginning. "John, let me ask you something," she said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Have you ever thought about your potential? Not just as a mechanic, but as someone who could go beyond what you know today?" John, caught off guard by the question, hesitated. "Well, I've never really imagined doing anything outside my workshop. That's where I know how to work, you know." She smiled, as if she had anticipated his answer. "Then let me show you something," Sarah said, standing up and motioning for him to follow her. They walked down a hallway that led to a room filled with photos, plaques, and awards. "These people here are automotive industry leaders I've worked with for years," she explained. "They're always looking for trustworthy and innovative partners for their businesses. And I see something in you that maybe you don't even see in yourself, an incredible potential to transform your life." John looked at the faces in the photos, all seeming so far removed from his own world. "But, what could I possibly offer them? I'm just a small-town mechanic." Sarah crossed her arms and tilted her head, as if weighing his words carefully. "Exactly, John. That's what makes you unique. You understand the needs of everyday people, something these big-time business leaders often lose sight of in their grand ventures. You have a practical and authentic perspective." The proposal was clear. Sarah offered to introduce John to these contacts, opening doors that could completely change his life. "These entrepreneurs need people like you. Partnerships based on trust and authenticity. And I know that with your talent, you could build something extraordinary." John felt the weight of the moment. It was as if the luxurious and solid floor of the mansion suddenly seemed uncertain beneath his feet. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit he couldn't shake. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her confidence almost contagious. "You don't have to decide right now. I just want you to know this opportunity is here. Think about it, John. The world is bigger than you can imagine, and you deserve to explore every corner of it." The promise of transformation was there, but the choice was his to make. John drove home that night, but his mind wasn't on the road. Sarah's words echoed in his head, like an engine that wouldn't stop turning. Partnerships based on trust and authenticity. He glanced down at his hands, still marked with the grease of his daily work, and wondered how someone like him could ever step into such a distant world. The lights of the neighboring city flickered in the distance, but they couldn't dispel the doubt growing inside him. It was a grand opportunity, but also a terrifying one. When he walked into his small house, the stark contrast between his world and the one Sarah had shown him hit him hard. The peeling paint on the walls, the hum of the old fan in the corner, everything seemed to whisper that he didn't belong in that other universe. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on his knees, as her words kept echoing, "You have something unique, something the world needs." He wanted to believe it, but insecurity hung over him like a shadow. The next day at the workshop, routine wrapped around him as it always did. Customers came and went, cars arrived broken and left working, and John found comfort in the familiarity of his work. Yet, as he tightened bolts and tested engines, his mind wandered back to the images of the business leaders on Sarah's walls. He thought about the risks. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? But at the same time, a spark of curiosity burned inside him. What if it works out? That afternoon, Sarah called. Her voice was calm and friendly. "John, I don't want to pressure you, but I just wanted to check in and see how you're feeling about the proposal." He took a deep breath before answering. "Look, Sarah, I'm really grateful. Honestly. But it's a lot to process, you know. I've always worked with regular folks, fixing old cars. That world you showed me, it feels so far away from mine." On the other end of the line, Sarah smiled. "I understand, John. And I don't expect you to decide now. Take all the time you need." In the days that followed, John tried to stick to his routine, but it was impossible to ignore the decision looming over him. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads. The proposal was an open door to something he'd never dreamed of, but it also represented a leap into the unknown. One evening, as he locked up the workshop, he looked up at the sky and murmured to himself, "If not now, when?" John's decision came on an unexpected morning as he sipped his usual bitter coffee from his chipped mug. The previous night had been long, filled with scattered thoughts that refused to leave his mind. He looked at the pile of bills on the table and the worn tools in the workshop. It all seemed to scream for change. "If not now, when?" he murmured again, as though the words had taken on a life of their own. He picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, but finally dialed Sarah's number. Her voice, warm as always, greeted him on the other end. "Sarah, I'm in. Let's do this." Sarah's response was immediate, filled with excitement. "John, you won't regret this. Trust me." She explained that a driver would pick him up in a few days to meet the business leaders she had mentioned. It was the beginning of something big, something John still couldn't fully grasp. When he hung up, he felt a mixture of relief and fear, relief for finally making a decision, and fear of the unknown that lay ahead. The days leading up to the meeting were a whirlwind. John cleaned his workshop, almost as if he were saying goodbye to it. Every corner of the place held a story, every tool carried the weight of years of hard work. This is where it all started, he thought, gazing at the familiar surroundings with quiet nostalgia. Still, something inside him told him it was time to turn this page and start a new chapter. When the driver arrived, John felt his heart race. Dressed in his best shirt, still modest but spotless, he climbed into the car, trying to conceal his nerves. The drive was long, and he watched the scenery pass by through the window, feeling as though he was leaving more than just a town behind. "Are you ready for this, John?" he asked himself. And for the first time, he heard a clear answer in his mind, "I am." Upon arriving at the destination, he was greeted with the same kindness Sarah had always shown. She was there, waiting for him with a reassuring smile. "Welcome to your new journey, John," she said, extending her hand. He shook it firmly, feeling that, in that moment, he wasn't just shaking the hand of a partner but sealing a commitment to himself. The door to the unknown was open, and he was ready to walk through it. John never imagined his first meeting with the business leaders would be so impactful. Sarah introduced him to a select group of influential figures in the automotive industry, each carrying years of experience and an air of authority. One of them, in particular, caught his attention, Peter Collins, a man with a direct manner and a piercing gaze, yet with a curiously welcoming demeanor. "So, you're the humble mechanic Sarah has been raving about?" Peter asked with a grin. Unsure whether to shrink back or take pride, John replied honestly, "I guess I am." The conversations that followed were eye-opening. Peter wasn't just looking for business partners, he wanted people with practical insight, those who understood what truly mattered to the everyday customer. "You know the heart of engines, John," Peter said. "But you also know the heart of people. That's what we need." It was then that a partnership was forged, one that changed everything. Peter invited John to become a consultant on an ambitious project aimed at modernizing automotive workshops in underserved areas, blending technology with accessibility. At first, John felt out of his depth. He found himself in meetings filled with technical jargon and strategies that felt like a foreign language. But gradually, he realized that his hands-on experience was exactly what the project had been missing. He brought innovative ideas born from years of solving real problems for everyday people. Each solution he proposed was met with enthusiasm, and for the first time, John began to feel like he truly belonged in this new world. The work was demanding, but in a way that was different from what he was used to. There was no grease on his hands, but the satisfaction of seeing his ideas come to life was just as fulfilling as fixing a stubborn engine. More importantly, he began to see the ripple effect of his contributions. The workshops he helped modernize not only thrived but also created opportunities for young apprentices, many of whom faced the same challenges he had once endured. Gradually, the financial struggles that had defined his life became a thing of the past. His old workshop became a cherished memory, and his new routine was filled with exciting challenges and a renewed sense of purpose. One day, while watching one of the renovated workshops bustling with activity, Peter approached him and said, "You made this happen, John. Don't underestimate the power of what you've started here." John smiled, finally understanding that with the right partnership and the determination to change, his life had been completely transformed. Months after accepting Sarah's proposal, John barely recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. It wasn't just the sharper clothes or the newfound sparkle in his eyes, but the confidence he now carried. The mechanic who once lived to put out financial fires now walked with purpose, guided by a partnership that made him believe in himself. The contrast between the life he left behind and the one he was building felt as vast as the difference between his old pickup truck and the luxury cars that had become a common part of his new reality. John, however, never forgot his roots. Whenever he passed by his old workshop, he would stop for a few minutes, park his car, and gaze at the place that had been his refuge for so many years. He knew he wouldn't have come this far without every challenge he had faced there. It was kindness, he would think to himself, recalling the night he stopped to help Sarah in the rain. That simple act, driven purely by the desire to do good, had been the start of everything. His work alongside Peter and Sarah wasn't just professional, it was profoundly human. Every workshop they renovated, every young person who found a fresh start there, served as a reminder of the power to transform lives. "John, you've inspired so many people," Sarah told him during a meeting. "Not just because of the results we've achieved, but because of the way you show that kindness can create real change." He, ever modest, would respond with a smile, "I guess I just did what anyone would have done." Yet, the transformation wasn't just external. For the first time, John felt his life carried a greater meaning. He wasn't just fixing engines anymore, he was helping to build futures for others. Every accomplishment seemed to echo that simple moment on the road when he decided to stop in the rain. It was as if the universe had whispered to him then, "Do this, and see what happens." At the grand opening of one of the newly refurbished workshops, John watched a young apprentice adjusting an engine with the same dedication he had once had years ago. It was impossible not to feel grateful. He had learned, in the most unexpected way, that kindness can turn into opportunities and, more than that, create a cycle of change that never ends. Deep down, though, he knew this was just the beginning. As the sun set on another day filled with accomplishments, John, now a transformed man, gazed at the horizon with a blend of serenity and gratitude. His life had taken a direction he never could have imagined, all because of a simple, almost instinctive act, stopping on the road to help a stranger. Who could have predicted that such a small gesture would trigger a chain of extraordinary events? This journey wasn't just about cars, business leaders, or mansions, it was about how kindness, no matter how small, can create ripples that touch lives far beyond what we can see. John's story serves as a powerful reminder that the greatest opportunities often lie hidden in the most ordinary moments. And what about you? Have you ever stopped to consider the impact your actions might have? How a smile, a word of encouragement, or a selfless act can not only brighten someone's day but alter the course of their life entirely. The world needs more people like John, people willing to act without expecting anything in return. Are you ready to be that person? Now we'd love to hear from you. How did this story touch you? What moment resonated with you the most? Share a word in the comments that sums up how you felt. Your interaction helps us continue to share stories as transformative as this one. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who could use a dose of inspiration today. And of course, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Turn on notifications and join our community of people who believe in the power of kindness and transformation. After all, as we've learned from John's journey, we never know where a small act might take us. Thank you for watching and sharing.